This episode of the Music Tech Teacher podcast is brought to you by Smart Music. Still the trusted way to connect teachers and students, the new Smart Music is in the cloud, so it works with the devices your students have today. Best of all, you can use it for free. Learn more at smartmusic.com. You're listening to the Music Tech Teacher podcast, episode number 13. Welcome to the Music Tech Teacher podcast. Music tech tips, lesson ideas, advice, news, and interviews, especially for music teachers. Brought to you by midnightmusic.com.au. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Music Tech Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Katie Wardrobe, a music tech trainer, presenter, and consultant from Melbourne, Australia. In today's episode, I thought I would talk about notation software and app options. Now, things have really changed a lot over the years. Personally, I grew up handwriting all of my scores. I'm going to show my age a little bit here. Handwrote all of my scores all the way through school and even university too. And there were really only a handful of people using notation software at the time. So it's not something I came to until a little bit later than that, when I was doing copying and arranging jobs. And I was also singing in an a cappella group and doing a lot of arranging for that group. So I wanted to have some other kind of solution. And at that stage, there really weren't many choices. I mentioned in a previous episode that at the time I went into a music shop and the person there thought that Logic was the best solution for me for notation, which probably shouldn't have been the option that I was sold. I probably should have been sold a copy of Finale at the time, but that was what I ended up with. And I later moved on to using Sibelius. Now, over the years, Sibelius and Finale have really been the main two options. They haven't been the only options over that time, but there's frequent discussion about which one of those is the better option. And there are actually a number of other options that have come along in more recent years. And those two programs, although they are fantastic and amazing, and I still use Sibelius, they may not be the right choice for everybody. So I wanted to run through some of the options today and, maybe it might help you work out what is the one that will suit you in your particular situation. Now, before we get started, there'll be a list of all of the software and apps that I'm going to mention with links to their pages on the show notes page for this episode on my website. And that link is midnightmusic.com.au/13. Now, if you go to that page, you'll see all of the things listed, but you can also download a copy of the resources and apps and software that I'm going to mention today. Now, when choosing notation software, I think there's a number of things you need to consider before making a decision. Some of the decision-making aspects to it are perhaps what device or platform you're using or would like to use. So that's whether you're using a laptop or a desktop computer. Is it Mac or PC? Have you got an iPad or an Android device or a Chromebook perhaps? And how portable do you want your notation to be? So if you are working at home, there's some solutions which will suit laptops and desktops. But if you want to do notation work outside, maybe when you're out and about on the train, commuting to work, there might be some different choices that you need to consider. The other thing that you need to think about is what your goals are. So is the notation software or app, is it going to be for you or for your students, or maybe for both? You might need a solution for both of those things. If it is for students, how old are the students? That's something also to consider. If it's you that's going to use the notation software, what is it that you want to use it for? So maybe you're arranging big band charts or full orchestra charts. Maybe you're writing film scores. Maybe you're writing worksheets for students or creating simple lead sheets and charts. Maybe you want to create backing tracks from the notation file. Maybe your students are just writing simple 4-bar exercises, or maybe your students are older and they're doing their own large arrangements or film scoring projects. The other thing to consider is, do you want to be able to handwrite the notation on a tablet and then edit it in some way after that? And do you need to print the music, or are you going to just view it on a screen? It's realistic to think that you as a teacher may actually end up with more than one solution, especially if you do a lot of high-level arranging and composing yourself. You might end up with a combination of things. So maybe there's a desktop solution or something that works on laptop as well for your kind of heavy work, that high-level arranging. Maybe you have a handwriting solution for on-the-go sketches. And maybe you have a different solution if you're using notation software with students at school. That might be a different solution altogether. So I'm going to run through all of the options now. Really, a lot of these are great programs, and there's not really one that's the best option for everybody. Like I said, it really depends on your own situation. So the first category or area that I'll talk about is those professional options, and this is where Sibelius and Finale fit. So each of those, if you're getting an education price for them, each of those are around the $300 or $350 mark, US dollars. And Sibelius also has a subscription option too. Now, both Sibelius and Finale have been around for a long time. They are the professional options. They're things that are used by publishers. They are the engraving or copying tool of choice by many people working in that area. And they have lots of features and lots of options. Lots of flexibility in how you print works, lots of flexibility with educational features as well as those for composers and copyists and arrangers. Now, these are great. If you're going to do a lot of work in this area, I would definitely suggest, considering getting one of those options. They're fantastic if you're creating even a lot of worksheets and resources, and really great if you're self-publishing any of your works. Also in this category is the new kid on the block called Dorico, and this is a software program which has been created by the team of people that used to work at Sibelius. They've moved on to Steinberg now, and it's fairly new. It's been released, but not for very long so far at the time that I'm recording. It's not yet fully featured, but I really think it's going to be a very, very strong third contender in this particular category, so it's definitely worth keeping an eye on. Now, all of these programs have all the features you could really ever need, pretty much. They have excellent output, they create beautiful looking scores, and they have lots of options for exporting and sharing. Now, the other side to this is that realistically, if you're working with students, and particularly younger students, these programs are overkill, I think. They're quite expensive and they can have a really steep learning curve for beginners. So if you're looking to find something to use with your students, I think there's possibly better options. And if you are working on a laptop and desktop only, you'll be very happy. But these programs don't have any iPad or tablet options. So there's no app to accompany Sibelius or Finale that allows you to actually edit the scores or create new scores on the app itself. So moving on, I want to talk about the one that I think really is the best all-round option at the moment, and that is NoteFlight. I really love this one for the situation where you might want to do notation work with students. It's a cloud-based program, so it works on all devices, which is fantastic. You can use it on your Mac or PC. You basically go to a web browser and you log in to your NoteFlight account, and you can use the notation right there in the browser itself. It also works really, really well on iPad and Android devices too, and that means that students can actually log in on whichever device they're using at the time. So they might start work at school in a computer lab, they might continue on at home on their own iPad, they might go to school the next day and use a completely different computer at the school, and they can keep working on the same score because all they need to do is open a web browser and log into their account. The way NoteFlight is set up, they have a Learn. They actually have a specific version for educators to use. So it's called NoteFlight Learn. And if you're using that account, it gives you basically a private website where all of your scores live and your students' scores live. So the privacy aspect is easy to manage there. In terms of pricing, NoteFlight is a subscription basis. So the NoteFlight Learn option is around $69 US for 10 users, and then you pay for extra students on top of that, and it's just a couple of dollars each per student per year. They have some extra content which you can access, and that's an additional price of around $5 a user. And that can be really awesome if you want to have your students study some works and look at the sheet music that's already in existence and do some work with those and sing and play that music. That can be great if you want to do that. You would pay for that extra content library access. I find Noteflight really quite easy to pick up. It's fairly intuitive to use, and some of the other benefits include there's an on-screen keyboard which allows you to play notes in. That works well both on the laptop or desktop version and on the iPad version. And it can also integrate with other learning management system platforms that you might be using. So if you use Moodle or one of those other LMS systems, Noteflight can integrate with that too. Now, as a teacher, you might actually find that Noteflight is perfectly adequate for your use as well, particularly if you're doing fairly straightforward arrangements and setting exercises and assignments and that type of thing for your students to use. I really think at the moment that Noteflight is the best option for students at school, right through to secondary school. And by the time they're getting older and perhaps choosing music as an elective subject, towards the end of school, and I'm talking juniors and seniors for those of you in the US, or year 11 and 12 for us here in Australia, that's when they may want to move on to something like Sibelius and Finale. But Noteflight would really be fine, up until that point. Another good student option to look at is flat.io. So Flat is the software program, and this is another cloud-based option. It's a little bit newer than Noteflight, so I don't find it to have as many features, but they're really working hard on their education aspect of the program. It's really worth a look if you're using Google Classroom because it has integration with the Google Classroom setup. There's also some integration with Soundtrap as well, which is an online program, a little bit like GarageBand, but an online version. And with Flat, you can export your notation score as a MIDI file directly into Soundtrap. So this means that students could notate something, send it to Soundtrap, and then record their voice over the top or add other instruments or a drum pattern or something else there. So it extends the creativity in that way. So as I said, not as fully featured as some of the other options at the moment, but they are adding features regularly. Like Noteflight, Flat is a subscription basis, and they have what's called a small pack available, which is $75, and that's for up to around 50 users. And then, again, like Noteflight, you pay for extra students at around $1.50 a user a year at the time that I'm recording this. After the break, we'll look at some other desktop or laptop options and also what the options are for tablets. This episode of the Music Tech Teacher podcast is brought to you by Smart Music. Smart Music is the music learning platform that allows teachers to connect with students as they practice. It makes it easy to create individualised assignments, hear student recordings, and provides specific guidance. Smart Music also empowers students by providing them with immediate feedback, both in terms of rhythm and pitch. This feedback transforms practice from passive repetition to active learning. The new Smart Music brings these resources into the cloud, so they work with Chromebooks, iPads, and other devices your students use today. Best of all, you can use it for free with limited repertoire, or access the full Smart Music library with an affordable pricing model that can be customised to fit any sized program. Learn more at smartmusic.com. Now, other desktop and laptop options are a couple of programs which you do need to install. So the next two that I'm going to mention are not cloud-based like Flat and Noteflight, but you install them in a similar way to Sibelius and Finale. And those two options are Notion and MuseScore. Now, Notion is great. I haven't used it a lot myself. I've had a bit of a look at it. It seems to be quite good to pick up, not maybe as steep a learning curve as something like Sibelius and Finale. It's also less expensive than those programs. The thing that Notion does really well is that it has fantastic sounds. So if that's an important aspect to you, if you want the playback to be sounding really good, and that's maybe if you're going to turn your notation file into a backing track or something like that, if that's your focus, then this might be a great choice to look at. The printed score is perhaps not as beautiful as some of those other ones, but that may not matter to you. So again, it's just something that you need to weigh up and definitely worth a look. So the second one that I mentioned is MuseScore. Now, MuseScore is an open source program. It's completely free to download. And if you're on a tight budget or you're working with students who are on a tight budget, it's a really good choice for them. So it doesn't have as many features as something like Sibelius and Finale, but again, it might be perfectly adequate for your needs. One thing that MuseScore doesn't do that some of the other programs like Sibelius and Finale do is that there is no real-time entry. So that's where you press record and you play live to a metronome click and the software notates what you're playing. Now, this might not be a deal breaker at all for some people. I quite like using real-time entry when I'm using Sibelius, but again, some people are not fussed by that at all. The alternative is you can still use a MIDI keyboard and you would use the step time entry method instead, which is where you select a rhythm manually and then you play the pitch into your MIDI keyboard. So you can still do that part in MuseScore. So this one's a great program for teachers that don't need all the bells and whistles that Sibelius and Finale have, and you want an economical option. And it's also great for tertiary students too, who do need that economical option as well. If you've got an iPad or an Android device and you want a slightly more portable option, there are some apps that you can use on those devices to do your notation work. So the ones that I mentioned before, Noteflight and Flat, they will both work on your tablet devices. The thing to remember with those ones is that they are browser-based, so you won't actually go to the App Store and search for Noteflight or Flat there. You'll actually need to open up a browser, say the Chrome browser on your device, and then you'll log in as usual in those websites and use the app that way. Other options for tablets, there are a couple of apps. One is Notion. So Notion that I mentioned earlier has a desktop version and an app version as well. And I really like their app version. So it works quite a bit like Sibelius or Finale and the Notion desktop version in that you are putting notes onto a stave from a palette of some sort, and you can add all the other aspects of elements of music into your score in the same way. So you'll add dynamics and trill markings and fingering and all that sort of stuff in the same way that you would in Sibelius or Finale. There's another app as well which is similar called Symphony Pro, and both of those apps are paid apps. Notion is the one that I like there, so if that's the sort of thing you're after, definitely give that a go. Now, if you're using one of these apps on your iPad, whether it's Notion or Symphony Pro or even Noteflight or Flat, the good thing is that you can export whatever you create there as a music XML file, and you can import that file into something like Sibelius or Finale. So if you do want to use Sibelius or Finale as your main notation software, but you also want to have some portability as well, then you could, for instance, create a score in Notion and then export it as music XML and send it across to Sibelius or Finale or Dorico, I should add in there too. And that would allow you to continue working on the score in those programs. So Music XML is the file type that is the best for switching between software program to software program. So if you choose to export from one software program, that's the file type that you need to choose, which will open up into the other software program. Now, lastly, I want to mention handwriting notation apps, and these are, of course, used on a tablet where you can use either your finger on the screen or a stylus. There's a couple of different options here as well, and you can use these as standalone apps. You could just simply handwrite into the app, and it basically transforms your handwritten notes into traditional printed looking notation scores. It's quite magic. This is one of those technology advances of recent times where I'm still really impressed with it. So I love the fact that I can write on my iPad screen and magically it turns into like real printed or published notation. I think kids really love that too. It is quite magical when you see it happening. One of the options in the handwriting category is Notate Me. Now, this is made by the people who make PhotoScore, if you've ever used PhotoScore scanning software. And they have Notate Me, which is an app where you can handwrite on the screen and it will transform it into a proper printed score. There's a couple of versions. There's one free version which allows you to have just a single instrument or stave. Great if you just want to try it out and see how it works, and it can be quite useful using that version with students themselves. There's a paid version, and I've mentioned this in a previous episode where I talked about scanning of music. The paid version is on the pricier side for an app, so it's around $40 or so. So it may not be something that you can consider rolling out to a whole group of students. That's probably beyond a lot of school budgets, but great if you want to use it yourself. When you're using Notate Me, it takes a little while to actually learn your handwriting style. So you'll see a message at the beginning of your time using the app saying that it's learning your handwriting. And as things go on, it becomes more and more accurate. Notate Me works on both iOS devices and also on Android devices too. Another option in this category, and it's one that I've discovered only much more recently, is called Touch Notation. And that's around $12 or so. They do have a free version as well. So again, it could be useful if you just want to test it out and see how it works. That allows you to just have a single score only. I really like the way this one works. It has some interesting, simple to use gestures. So by that I mean the way that you draw on the screen and the way it recognises your handwriting. There's some other kind of cool things, like if you want to play back a specific bar, you actually draw a right-facing triangle, which looks like a play button on a CD player or a DVD player or something. If you just draw a right-facing triangle, it will play that bar for you instantly. So that's kind of cool. I like that. It has a nice looking interface as well. Now this one's iOS only, so if you're an Android user, unfortunately this is not going to be an option for you. The last one I'll mention in this category is a Windows option, and it's specially designed for the Surface Pro, which is called StaffPad. And this one is one where you would use a pen. It looks really good. I don't have a Surface Pro, so I haven't tested it myself, but you can look at a YouTube video and see how it works. It looks really good. If you've got a Surface Pro, this would definitely be something to look at. And again, you can use this to handwrite some scores and then send a music XML file to another software program if you're using that. So it works really well hand in hand with something like Sibelius or Finale. Now, that's a lot of information about all of the options that are available. And as you can tell, there's just so much more to choose from these days, and it can be a little bit overwhelming, I think. So in summary, I think if you're a teacher or a composer or arranger and you've got high level needs for publishing your own music and doing arrangements and all of that, realistically, you are going to be better off in the long run, I think, with something like Sibelius or Finale or Dorico. If you're a teacher that has more simple scoring needs, Noteflight or MuseScore or Notion, particularly Notion for its playback quality, but Noteflight or MuseScore are fantastic options, and that might be all that you need. If you're working with students, Noteflight is great. Flat, as I mentioned, works well with Google Classroom, so if you're using that, definitely have a look there. And MuseScore is another option there too. And in the handwriting area, again, you kind of need to choose that one based on what type of device you have. So Notate Me, which will work on both iOS and Android, Touch Notation for iPad users, and StaffPad if you're on Surface Pro. So hopefully that's useful information. Just a reminder that you can find links and resources from this episode at midnightmusic.com.au/13. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.